Please welcome Senator Andrew Brenner.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody. I've said this before. My pronouns are conservative, Republican, Trump voter. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of our schools, or what they are. Many of you probably know or can remember back to 1983 and the report that was given out called A Nation at Risk. Believe it or not, that was almost 40 years ago for those of you using the new math. So anyway, that was issued by the National Commission on Excellence in Education, and basically it said that we were in trouble. We haven't changed much since then, except it's gotten a lot worse in the last 2 years specifically because of the pandemic and just because of the fact of what the system itself is. Now, I've been on the Education Committee for the Ohio Senate, and I've been on the Education Committee. I served 8 years in the Ohio House and was on that committee the whole time. One of my first things that I did was right out of college at Ohio State, about 30 years ago now, was run for Buckeye Valley School Board, which was the rival of Big Walnut PAC, and we had our own things for calling Big Walnut, which I can't repeat in a church. So, but I did that because the schools had a lot of problems, even then. I remember rundown buildings. I remember, heating and air conditioning, that kind of stuff not working. I thought I would run. Probably the grace of God, I actually lost. So that was it was something that was probably needed to lose, because if I was on the school board, that's a thankless job. And so I give a quick round of applause to everybody who's serving on a school board. If you're on a school board, stand up. Let's give you a round of applause, because that is a thankless job. So I've been working on education policy. I've been heavily pro-school choice. In fact, so pro-school choice that 4 years ago, my opponent really ripped me. They called me ECOT Andy, which I'm now proud of. Not because of being called that, but because actually they outperformed the current schools, which I'm going to briefly go through here. The state of our schools is not just what it was in a nation at risk, but I would say it's catastrophic. And I've told some of you have sat in on some of the meetings where I've talked about some of our schools, especially our urban schools. But I'm going to go ahead and give it. You've probably heard that the NAEP scores were released. The NAEP scores basically show that the last 20 years of progress in math and English in the United States has completely been vaporized in basically a 2-year period, which means the kids are now performing nowhere near where they should be. The NAEP scores are way off anyway from where they should be compared to some of the other nations in the world. Our state standardized tests, you need to get about 50% of the test questions correct, 50 to 57% correct on a state standardized test for math, English, American government, American history, and sciences. And the scores plummeted in 2021 because of the pandemic things that were put into place. The remote learning, the social distancing, the requiring kids to be quarantined when they weren't really even the risk to begin with. I mean, it is catastrophic, but in a way, it also has opened up everybody's ability to look to see what was going on in the schools. And some of the test scores, some of the urban centers, they were bad, and not just slightly bad. I gave some examples, and I was always giving everybody a pop quiz. So what was the pop quiz? And it was, so what do you think the Youngstown City Schools 5th grade math test scores results were in 2021? And knowing that you need to get about 50% of the test questions correct. And a lot of people are like, oh man, it's going to be bad, probably 30%, 20%. I had somebody get down to like 10. The result in that school year was 2.4%. And they had outperformed East Cleveland, which had a 1.8%. 2022 wasn't much better. East Cleveland did move. Well, their 5th grade went up, but their 8th grade fell, so they had a passage rate, I think, of about 2.2% in East Cleveland City Schools 8th grade math. So and I'm saying a lot of this stuff, I do have some solutions I think that we can implement going forward. But these schools, the failure there is partially due to the fact that, these kids were not going to school. But we had chronic absentee rates that have skyrocketed. So to be chronically absent, you need to be absent at least 10% of the school year. That's not good, because if you're missing more than 10 days of school, you're missing basically 2 weeks of school, and you're going to be way behind, and you're probably not going to catch up. So like Columbus Public Schools in both 2021 and 2022 school years, their chronic absentee rate was 75% and 65%. Most of our urban schools was in the 50+% range. The chronic absentee rate overall in the state of Ohio last school year, we had, if you are a black student, you had a chronic absentee rate statewide, doesn't matter where you were, of an average of 49.8%. And then yet we wonder why the kids are doing poorly there. Well, if they're not in school, you're not going to learn. And yes, we've been fighting a lot of baloney. I was standing up initially, as Jack was, to discuss, hey, we need to get the kids back into school. This isn't working. They shouldn't be masked, because if a kid's masked or the teacher's masked and the kid's trying to learn, they have to read using the lips and so forth, they can't do it. So I think a lot of kids ended up just feeling depressed. They quit going to school and so forth. We've had other problems. The pandemic caused lots of shortages. We've got teacher shortages. We've got substitute teacher shortages. We've got bus driver problems. In fact, so many that charter schools are having a hard time getting their kids picked up and taken to school and returned to school. In Ohio, charter schools, charter non-public, Catholic, you name it, they are all required to be picked up by the local school district where the kids are located. The local school district is paid money to pick those kids up, to take them to their schools. Well, we've had a complete colossal failure. Even within the last few weeks, we've got kids, I guess there was some charter in Reynoldsburg. The classroom was empty because there weren't any bus drivers to pick up the kids. Or the local school district was, I think, using their poor management to not pick the kids up, because guess what? If the kids don't get picked up to take to the charter school, they'll probably go back to the traditional public school. So in a way, they're kind of using monopolistic type of practices to get the kids to go back to the traditional schools. However, we do have a problem. We do have a bus driver shortage. In 2018, we had 25,000 bus drivers in the state of Ohio. This year, it's 18,000. Now, mind you, there's 54,000 people in Ohio with a bus driver or a S endorsement on their CDL license. So there are bus drivers, but people just aren't going back to do that. We've got an education system, which I called 6 years ago and got in trouble on Rachel Maddow on her blog by calling it a socialism. Our education system is basically socialism. And for those that don't know the definition, it is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange would be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Well, that's our education system. So I was pointing that out because it is massively bureaucratic. Everything. The teachers' unions are bureaucratic. Your administrative rules, they're books that are, inches thick of administrative rules, inches thick of Ohio Revised Code, because they are government-run schools. Now, yes, you all vote for local board members to have oversight over the running of the local district, but these are government-run schools. So you're ending up with more bureaucracy, more things have occurred over the years, which has helped cause this catastrophic failure. You've had a breakdown of families in urban centers especially. You no longer have, and I think Charlie Kirk has talked about this, if you ever follow any of his stuff, about the fact that the African-American families, there's, the husband isn't there. And it's either a lot of these kids are being raised by single moms, and so you have a complete breakdown, and then their scores aren't as good. So poor is it that if you take a look at our state standardized test expectations in the state of Ohio, They're different for white students than they are for black students. In fact, their black students, I believe, is 20 points lower than the white expectations on the reports going forward for the state standardized test between now and the year 2030. That's appalling, that is horrible, that is bad, that needs to be corrected. They should have the same standards, they should meet the same goals and expectations that we have for every student. We've got a situation that, the kids in Youngstown, and I mentioned this one, because Youngstown, some of these schools were under academic distress, so we took them out of academic distress. We returned the local control back to the district. So they came up with their own academic distress, let's get out of trouble plan for the next 3 years. And this would be for their third, fourth, fifth graders. The third, fourth, fifth graders, their expectations for the year 2025 for proficiency was in the 15% range. That was what Youngstown proposed the Ohio Department of Education, that in 3 years their kids would be 15% proficient, meaning 85% of the kids would still be below proficiency. The Department of Ed raised that to the mid-30s. That's still a joke. They should be a system that is bulldozed. And this is the problem. These systems are what are in place. They're not working. We need to change the systems. And one way we change the systems is through school choice. Political agendas. Well, political agendas have been in teachers' unions for a long time. We know that because the National Education Association head and the Ohio Federation, or the National Federation of Teachers head, of course, has been in the Ukraine. Clearly because education is needed in Ukraine. So she's been over there wandering around looking at things in Ukraine. Meanwhile, our education infrastructure here has been completely collapsing and falling apart. We can't allow that to happen. We can't allow that to continue. But they are a bureaucracy themselves, as is our local school system. So the local school board members have a lot of power, a lot of ability, that they are the ones that are really supposed to tell the superintendent what to do, not the other way around. The superintendent is there to run the schools at the direction of the school board. When things are not going well, it is up to the superintendent to fix the school, and then he or she is held accountable to the school board. A lot of the stuff that goes out from these associations, and as I've been chair, every acronym that's out there for the Ohio School Boards Association and School Business Administrators, all those organizations now are bureaucratically run. So they're making bureaucratic decisions which aren't necessarily in the best interest of the kids. Now, it's not that, and I'm not criticizing them, because I think they think this is in the best interest of the kids. Many of these groups are also pushing that, it's in the best interest of the kids that we support transgender youth. Well, I don't know of anybody that was been out there criticizing transgender youth, but the fact that they're pushing a political agenda, trying to get all the kids to think that they're transgender or they're non-binary or they're something that they're not, that's a political decision that should not be in the schools and needs to be removed from the schools. So some of the things that I think, some of the solutions that we're going to have, clearly, like what Governor DeSantis has done down in Florida, some of those things should be brought here, and they should be passed. They should be into law. The governor should sign them. Like clearly a parent's Bill of Rights. I mean, that has to happen. Parents here need to know exactly what's going on with their kids in the classroom, and it is not up to the state, the local school district, state school, to withhold that information from the parent, because it is the parent's right and it is the parent's responsibility, and they necessarily need to know what's going on with their kids. So we need to include that. The parents, the families, the grandparents, everybody who happens to be raising the kids, you also need to know exactly what's going on in the school. So in the 130th General Assembly, I believe it was a bill I carried for the governor, College Credit Plus. We put in there that curriculum, instructional materials, and textbooks were all the total control of the local school board. Now we need to apparently make sure that all three of those things are also completely transparent to the public so the public has access and that they can see what is going on in the schools. So I think that is part of this Parents' Bill of Rights is transparency. You have to know what's going on in your school so that you can stand up in your local school board and complain or go to your local teacher and say, this is not right. Now, since we are in a church here, I want to take a look at some of this from a perspective. I went to Liberty University to complete my master's in education, and Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Daniel 1:17, for all these four youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. If the kids can't learn because there's political agendas going on, they're not going to learn how to read. They're not going to know math. They're not going to know science. And I'm talking actual science, not the stuff that we pulled during the pandemic, where we basically ignored science, and anybody that questioned anything became apparently a martyr or something because, you know, these kids that were left out of the schools, they were left out of the schools because the science wasn't there. The science wasn't followed. I'm sorry. Just the sheer thing with the masking, these mRNA vaccinations, and by the way, for those of you that did see the CDC stuff, and I know there were some questions about that, Ohio Revised Code specifically spells out on that particular issue which vaccines are required. COVID vaccinations are not on that list. So it has to be spelled out in Ohio Revised Code. If any local school district tells you that it's required, they don't have the authority to do it. You may have to sue them, but they don't have the authority. And for those where there is a requirement, you do have there are opt-outs for religious and conscience reasons. So we need to do that. The science, again, is being ignored. The Ohio High School Athletic Association, I met with them a couple times over the last year over transgender youth, boys specifically competing in girls' sports. And I think that clearly that's a problem because boys are physically more capable of doing physical activity. Now, if it's, something like curling, I don't know, maybe they can compete in curling. That should be something that needs to be reviewed. But we've got to make sure that we have a level playing field for girls. I know that we are working on bills in the Senate and I think in the House to try to deal with that. To protect girls, boys being teenage boys are trying to take advantage of things to try to go into girls' locker rooms or girls' bathrooms. And so we need to start using common sense and bringing common sense back into our schools. That has been lacking. And I think if we bring the common sense back, we're going to unfortunately have to bring common sense back probably by using legislation because unfortunately we're lacking the common sense in the schools. But we also need to go back to the basics. I know that within the last 10 years there's been this big discussion of a Common Core. I'm pretty sure most of you are probably against Common Core if you weren't to begin with. But we do need to return back to phonics and traditional math in our schools. I think one of the biggest things that we've seen with the fall off in the math scores especially is that the parents and the grandparents have no idea how to teach or help their kids when they're at home with the math because it is the new form of math and it is not the form of math that we were all raised and taught on. So we need to get back to that, and I think that's the other reason why the math scores are absolutely atrocious, let alone some of the reading scores. Another thing we need to take a look at is fixing our colleges and higher education because the teachers that are going into our schools today are being indoctrinated in higher education with ideas that just don't work. I know many of you we've had discussions over whether it's critical race theory. Well, critical race theory is just a bad political move, and that should never be in our schools. Social and emotional learning, that was an idea that came about primarily because of broken down families, and then the schools are dealt with, okay, how do you deal with the kid who's disruptive in class and who doesn't have a parent or, some of the parents are alcoholic or drug addicted. But again, the left has taken that over and they've put in all the leftist socialist jargon to try to push it. So we've got to make sure that transparency and that stuff is available so that we can undo it. And actually, we just got to tell parents, look, you've got a parent. You're the ones in charge of your kids. You're the ones that are responsible for raising them, and it's the schools can't do it. I think that's something that we're going to have to start saying is the schools just can't do it. It is going to be up to it's got to be up to parents, and we've got to start pulling some of this stuff back because if we don't, we're going to be in a position where every kid is going to essentially be brain dead and incapable of doing anything without looking it up initially or sending out some sort of social media post and thinking that that's being productive when it isn't. I was talking about systems. We need to fix the systems. We need to fix the education system with school choice. So some of the things that I think we want to do, besides the Parents' Bill of Rights, you definitely need a form of the backpack bill where the money follows the student to whatever school the parents wish to place their kids. Because that returns the power back to the parents. It returns the power back to where it needs to be. And with that money that follows that kid to the other school, that forces the local school system to have to make different decisions because if they don't, they know they're going to be in trouble. So I think that we're going to have to do that. We're also going to have to make sure that the charter schools and the kids who are going to the alternative schools, that their funding is the same as the traditional public schools, and it's not. It's about 60% of the traditional public schools. And yet we wonder why the charter schools have a hard time to compete and keep teachers because they're constantly poached from the traditional public schools who take them. So we need to do that. We need to make sure that we're fully funding them, making sure that the money follows the student in a backpack bill. I believe we're going to be doing something like this in the next budget in the next 6 months in the Ohio General Assembly. Again, it's not the state's responsibility to withhold information from parents. Parents need to return that power. And I'm going to take another one here. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The other problem that we have in our schools is that God is no longer there, and I'm sorry, the churches need to do a better job of making sure that we're reaching out to the youth, because if they're godless and they don't have any higher calling, they're not going to do it, and they're going to just go around aimlessly. And I think that's what's happened, especially in our urban schools. You're seeing that all over the place. You have the urban decay, the rot, the fact that you have to go into school buildings and you need metal detectors, and there's kids that are getting shot in those schools, that's a problem. So I think that's another one. We've got to get back, and I think we as the citizens of the state of Ohio, parents, the grandparents, you all, the churches need to start reaching out and to these kids that are troubled. It's going to take you guys to do it. In Proverbs 18:15, an intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Those things have also been missing, I think, in our schools, and the fact that kids have become callous. Take a look at social media, and that's part of the problem. If you take a look at my own Facebook page in the last week or two, I've had some people that are just nasty. They know I'm pro-life. They know I voted for the heartbeat bill. And they have just posted the meanest stuff you'd ever want to see on there. And they think that they're making a point. Well, they're making a point for my voters to vote for me because clearly what they're posting is not going to help their cause on the abortion side. And but it's that callousness, it's that lack of being able to work and communicate with people. I think that has happened, and unfortunately, I think that's just infiltrated all of our schools. So when you do go to your boards, I mean, yes, be outraged, but be kind. Don't be berating people. But it is okay to be angry because there are a lot of problems in our schools and they have to be fixed. They have to be corrected. And it is going to take basically everybody in here, everybody in the state of Ohio to try to work to pull them together. So those are some of the things we're working on. I think that we will get these things fixed. I think school choice is, in the long run, the solution. In the short run is, take back control of your local school boards. Make sure you elect people that are standing up for individual kids, families, and improving the system to the point where kids are learning the basics. If they can't learn the basics, they're not going to move on. So I just want to say that it's been a privilege having worked in the Ohio Senate. I'm expected to win, I believe, in the upcoming election based on the demographics of the district. I'm looking forward to working with and continue to work on education. And I will, based on this current Senate president, most likely still be the Senate Education, Primary and Secondary Education Committee chair. But you all still need to also continue to reach out to us, support those that are standing up for school choice, support those who are standing up for getting the transgender stuff out of the school, stopping critical race theory, and stand up for those kids who are right now voiceless in many of the cases. So meeting with your legislators, that's highly important, and I would encourage everybody to do that. I would encourage you to do it on a regular and routine basis, and if you do that, I think we will improve things in the long run. I think we will make the United States that shining hill again, like Ronald Reagan said, and I think that we will continue to be the nation's best, or the world's best nation, but it's going to take us to stand up, rise up, stand up for what's right, stand up for God, stand up for Jesus, stand up and do the things that I believe God has put into our hearts, because if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. So I thank you all very much for allowing me to come here and speak today, and I very much appreciate the time here. God bless you all.